Well, good morning, everybody. We want to thank you for being here at the annual meeting of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. We apologize for starting a couple minutes late, and we'll also ask you to bear with us. We actually have a decent number of people in the room, and we have about 3 times that number of people online right now. And so one of the new things, this is the first in-person meeting we've had since before the pandemic. And so we are taking advantage of the technologies. We've done most of our meetings for the last couple of years strictly remote. And we thought it would be good with so many things happening with passenger rail service right now to get back together in person. But there has been a lot of interest. And one of the things is our region covers a wide geographic area. And so that means people that are in St. Croix County and places like that, if we have a meeting in Eau Claire, a lot of times it's easier to join online. I did look at the list, and I'm looking at some of you people from Eau Claire who are online with us too. And you're doing it from your office, and we appreciate that as well. And we also know there are people joining us from other parts of the state and out of state. So my name is Scott Rogers. I'm currently the chair of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition, and we want to welcome you to the meeting today. And we keep having trouble with our PowerPoint advancing. We keep testing it and it keeps working and then it stops. Yeah. So I'm going to have Mark do that again, where we're going to restart it. We want to thank CVTC for hosting us today. We appreciate their involvement in the Rail Coalition and for helping out with a program like this. Actually, Adam Whaling, who's in the back of the room over there, is the Dean of Agriculture and several other things here. He also serves on the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission on behalf of CVTC as an at-large or as an ex officio member. So I wanted to go to let's restart the slideshow. So you test things out and they work, and then you start using them and they don't always. So there we go. This is our agenda for today, and hopefully you can keep the slideshow rolling. I don't know if we stop and it won't connect, but I'm going to give you some background and information about the Rail Coalition, some of our history, and particularly what's happening right now, kind of a summary of that. Then we're going to have Lisa Stern here from Wisconsin DOT, who is going to talk about what Wisconsin's rail programs are and what's happening with the federal infrastructure bill. We're going to take a break after that. We'll have Arun Rao here from Amtrak, who will talk about the Amtrak Connexus plan that includes service through West Central Wisconsin, including Eau Claire, Menominee, and Hudson. And then at the end of the program, we have Rick Harnish with us from the High Speed Rail Alliance in Chicago, and he will talk about the longer term vision for passenger rail and why having a network is important. So looks like the clicker's still working. We do want to thank all of you who are joining online. We probably would encourage you, when you go to the view on your Zoom, we will be sharing slides most of the time. And if you want to see the speaker, if you click on your view to highlight speaker, that should help out. If you're an experienced Zoomer user, you can decide how you want to look at things. But if this is your first time using it, you might find that worthwhile. This is what we talk about when we talk about West Central Wisconsin, really the region starting in Eau Claire County, Eau Claire and Chippewa counties, west to the river to the Twin Cities. And the Rail Coalition's been around a little bit, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But when people in Eau Claire think about passenger trains, a lot of time this is the vision they see. Anybody know what this is? This is something called the 400. It was started in the 1930s, ran 400 miles in 400 minutes from Chicago to the Twin Cities, and it had a stop in Eau Claire and other West Central Wisconsin communities. And in its last iteration, it looked like this. It was a streamlined train on the Chicago and Northwestern, and they did get good crowds at Eau Claire. This is some people boarding the train in Eau Claire. However, if we put a group of people like this together, most of us are not dressed the same way as you see here. So that you can tell that that was quite a while ago. And that train was discontinued in 1963. So it's been a long time. There are a few people around who do remember it. But really over the period from the end of World War II through the 1970s and even 80s, most of our public investment in transportation went to highways and airports. And this is the vision we had, those wide open roads and easy to get on a plane and go somewhere. And sometimes the vision looks more like this. We're maybe too tired to drive, traffic congestion, long lines at the airport, and days like today, and some worse where we have to deal with snow, and then uncertainty of gas prices and what it's going to cost to travel. And one of the things that's happening around the country, even though we can't experience it right here in West Central Wisconsin, is in a lot of ways we are going back to the future, and maybe it's a better future. And people are actually going by train. Here's a historic station that is very active right now, actually. This is Portland, Oregon. They have something called the Cascades Corridor up and down that part of the Pacific Northwest up to Vancouver and down into Eugene, Oregon. And a lot of people are using the train in places like that. So what about West Central Wisconsin? Those of us who have been involved in the Rail Coalition do believe that the economic, demographic, social, transportation issues are converging to make it important for us to have passenger rail service to be competitive. The origin of the Rail Coalition, I just want to tell you a little bit about that. We've been around a long time, and the way we got started was a number of the business, education, community leaders from our region actively go to Madison and talk to state legislators and others. And we saw this map that was put out by our DOT and others called the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative. And you can't see it that well, but if you look at where Eau Claire and West Central Wisconsin are, you see a little red dotted line. And they envisioned a multi-state rail network that is still being worked on and is making progress now. And our entire involvement in that was going to be a bus connection to Toma. And so the leaders of this area said, well, wait a minute, why can't we be part of that? And some of those people were very farsighted. They were longtime leaders of our community. And if you know some of these names, you also know that they're not with us anymore, that they were involved in this issue. I got to know a lot of them personally a few years ago. Owen Ayers, who is the founder of Ayers Associates, a major national engineering firm. Ray Willoughby, a local banker here, and Bill Leinenkugel, who was president of Leinenkugel Brewing at the time. And they started a committee under Momentum West, which is our regional economic development organization, to really work on that, and came up with this mission statement saying that we want to develop passenger rail service as part of a strategy for a balanced transportation system for our region for long-term sustainable economic growth. So really the economic argument for having it to be competitive. Made some arguments such as our fast-growing counties and cities in this area. We have major state universities in River Falls, Menominee, and Eau Claire that all would be high traffic generators. And then we have a lot of trips here in between here and the Twin Cities, a lot of people crossing the St. Croix River every day. Sometimes there's congestion. We need another way to get around between cities. We had some success. So our first effort as a coalition was to get on the map, if you will. And Wisconsin DOT, as far back as 2004, came out with a report saying that either running some of the Chicago Twin Cities services, not only through La Crosse, but also through Eau Claire, or strictly Eau Claire to the Twin Cities, were financially feasible and should be considered. Each state has to come up with something called a state rail plan, which is a longer term vision of where their networks are going. Minnesota's rail plan includes an Eau Claire to Twin Cities route. And then this is the current Wisconsin State Rail Plan, which Lisa's going to touch on because we have a new one coming out imminently, right? That's the word. But you can see that there is a line on there in the long-term plan for Wisconsin to have passenger rail service through our area. And so one of the things we did as a coalition, since just getting your line on a map doesn't get you a passenger train, does it? So we started looking around at other areas of the country. We saw things like Brightline, which you want to look into in Florida, where they're building a line from Orlando to Miami with direct connections. And one of the aspects of that is not only the high level of frequency and customer service, but the economic development around the stations that are really driving that. The picture on the upper right is Normal, Illinois. Normal Bloomington is the site of Illinois State University. Mid-sized city in the middle of Illinois. Sounds like Eau Claire and UW Eau Claire, right? They put in a new station, and they've had over $200 million in economic development around their station. They do have 10 trains a day stopping there, so that's part of it. And then we looked at commissions and authorities around the country, and we saw that where there was a local organization, particularly in the public sector, that was either managing the service or advocating for the service, and you see some logos there, that they are much more successful at having passenger trains started or operating better. We do have passenger service in Wisconsin, and it's one of the most popular ones in the country and the most popular in the Midwest. And that's the Chicago to Milwaukee service. It's continued to improve, continued to grow ridership without a little bit of a bump during COVID, but recognizes a very integral part of our transportation network in Wisconsin. And so we're interested in seeing that expand at other places. And in fact, what is happening is Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and Amtrak are about to start this year another train on the current route between Chicago, Milwaukee, La Crosse, and the Twin Cities to supplement the long distance train that currently operates on there called the Empire Builder. That's going to be starting sometime this year. And one of the aspects of the plan, this is a map that was put out while it was being planned. We actually do want the bus connection to Toma that I talked about before. We want to start with that. And one of the visions for this is to have service, I'm jumping ahead here, to have a bus connection from our region, possibly Menominee, possibly Eau Claire, where you'd be able to buy a ticket from Eau Claire to say Milwaukee or Chicago, and it would include your shuttle ride to Toma. You get on the train and go from there. And that would be part of the implementation of the second service, which also should be somewhat more reliable because it'll start in St. Paul rather than in Seattle and Portland. So I said, you don't just get a line on a map. We've seen progress because Wisconsin and Minnesota have been working to get additional train service, but a very major thing that is really significant right now, you'll hear more about it from our other speakers. And this is a chart you can't really read, but this is an FRA chart that shows the $66 billion that's been committed for passenger rail development in our country over the next 5 years. And this chart, what you're seeing here is the small bars on the left are the annual federal investment in passenger rail service over the last 10 years. If you stack those bars on top of each other, every year now for 5 years, there's going to be that much investment. And so the FRA is working to make that happen. But the Federal Railroad Administration, part of Wisconsin DOT, they came out just last month with a solicitation to invite states and authorities and commissions and others to submit routes to be designated for this corridor program and be eligible for federal funding. And you'll be hearing more about that from some of our other speakers as well. So I showed you this chart, and I mentioned that local commissions and state authorities and others have been an important part of making these things happen. And that's been happening locally here too. When I started, I mentioned the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission, and what happened in 2021 really got active in 2022 is St. Croix, Dunn, and Eau Claire counties and the municipalities of Altoona, Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, New Richmond, and Hudson all passed joint resolutions to form the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission, which is something that can be done under state statutes to plan for transportation improvements. And it has gotten going, has been working on this issue. And as part of its work, those 9 entities plus the Rail Coalition are voting members. Dunn County has been hosting the meetings. And then several other key stakeholders in the implementation of the service have become ex officio members. Importantly, that includes the Union Pacific Railroad, over whose tracks the trains would run, our Wisconsin and Minnesota DOTs, Ramsey and Washington counties, the 2 in Minnesota, the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Organization, which is our metropolitan planning organization here, and then our 3 state universities and 2 technical colleges have been also very active in this effort to get things going. So in summary, there are really 3 options for passenger rail service for our area. We actually are hoping all 3 happen. One is a frequent regional corridor between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities. That's something the Rail Coalition has been working on for a while. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Through service from Chicago to Milwaukee to the Twin Cities. I mentioned that there's a new train starting between Chicago and the Twin Cities. There's serious talk about future services that are added as frequency is increased to have a train, one of the next trains, if not the next train, operate via the Union Pacific from a junction at Camp Douglas up through Eau Claire, Menominee, and Hudson. And then, as I mentioned, the throughway shuttle connection to existing Amtrak stations, such as from Menominee or Eau Claire to Toma. That has already been done in places like California. Wisconsin has a very active program now. There's a shuttle from Green Bay down the Fox Valley through Oshkosh and Fond du Lac to Milwaukee that connects with that Hiawatha service. You'll hear more about that. And then this is a sample schedule that was shown, I think, a year and a half ago, what it might look like if we had a shuttle that connected us to the new Twin Cities train. The other thing I mentioned was the through service. Amtrak put out a map when the federal funding looked like it was going to be coming through and said, if this federal funding comes through, you'll hear more about this from Arun later today. What might be some of the routes that would make sense to add? And if you take a look at zoom in on Wisconsin, you see Green Bay, Madison, and our West Central Wisconsin lines are on that map. I showed you a map earlier and you'll see that it's effectively the same map, and that is the state rail plan. So one of the positives of our state rail plan is Amtrak looked at that, knew they had a good partner in WISDOT, and said, we think these routes make sense for us to consider going forward. The other thing I mentioned was the local service between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities, a regional corridor. We know that there's a lot of traffic between our areas, and we have been working on that, working with the Union Pacific, which is really interested in that. We know the Hiawatha, which is 7 going to 10 eventually core trains every day. We need to have enough trains each day to make it convenient for people. So as we visioned it, and of course it would all be based on actually checking out all the feasibility, what we are hoping to have is an auto-competitive travel time, probably something like 4 round trips a day. So you can go when you want to go. Stations would include not only Eau Claire, Menominee, and Hudson, but also possibly Baldwin or Stillwater. We'd be looking at that. You'd be able to have Wi-Fi. You could bring your bike on board. There'd probably be food and drink, and be something that you could redeem your time instead of being stuck to the wheel going into the Twin Cities and wondering about traffic. You'd be able to take the train. I've talked about Amtrak, and I'm going to bring on a couple other people who are remote. All of your speakers today are in person, but we do have a couple of remote speakers. So I'm going to give Ray and Mason a heads up, and hopefully this part of our Zoom will work, or at least you'll hear them if you can't see them. And the slide I have up right now shows something called the Association for Innovative Passenger Rail Operation. And I mentioned Brightline before, and there's a lot of innovation going on as to how do you operate passenger rail service. And one of the slides I showed earlier showed all of the different local services that entities have been involved in, authorities and commissions and so forth. And one of the slides was called CT Rail. And that is Connecticut decided to operate some additional passenger train service between Hartford, Springfield, or Hartford, I'm sorry, New Haven, Hartford, and Springfield, if you put that map in your mind, if you know your geography. And they put it out competitively. They said, we want to operate some trains in this area, and Amtrak was one of the ones they considered. And this group of 4 companies, Herzog, Keolis, Transdev, and RATP Dev, were among, they're part of this association. And what these companies do is, oh, now my clicker just quit working. So, but actually I was going to go to Ray and Mason now anyway. So these are contract carriers. They actually each operate more trains and carry more passengers every year in our country than Amtrak does. But you don't ever hear of them because they're known as the New Mexico Rail Runner, or they're known as the Milwaukee Streetcar, or they're known as the Tri-Rail in Miami. So they operate under contract for different kinds of authorities. And I'm going to bring on Ray Chambers and Mason Baxter, who are with AI Pro, this association. We're going to talk, we are, as a commission, the Chippewa St. Croix Commission is working with them as a possible competitive operation between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities. So we're looking at a vision of having through Amtrak service through here and a local service that would be potentially operated by them. So Ray, are you there? Can you hear me?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Right. And then I think we have Mason on too. Is that right?
I am also here.
All right.
Okay.
Terrific. And I'm not
We
sure.
also have
I can share if you'd like.
Okay, we'll
Scott.
stop sharing and we'll put their pictures up. I do have some slides about AI Pro, but we'll bring those up later. So
I think we
Ray,
also have Greg on, who's our vice chairman of AI Pro.
okay. All right. Oh, Greg Baxter from Herzog. So great.
Okay.
So Ray, just kind of briefly, we've got a few minutes. Tell us,
Yeah.
what is AI Pro?
Okay. By the way, that was really an excellent presentation, the best I've heard. And I think this meeting, which you're going to be seeing similar ones around the country, is a great start for the new, what I call the SID program, or the Corridor Identification and Development. AI Pro has been around for now about 12 years. We're very low key. We've never put out a press release. You showed the members are composed of 4 operators, as well as 2 labor unions, which hold a board seat. And then we have some other associate members. We, as you pointed out, we came together several years ago just to kind of protect the idea of competition. My group compete against each other in many of these, particularly in these commuter operations for service. However, we have a major footprint in American railroading. The last survey we did was in 2019, and we ran about 80 million passengers on 250,000 trains, but our names are not on the side of the train. Now, our goal is to protect competition, both in the commuter arena, which I think is that battle is won basically. Almost all of the new authorities have gone to the competitive model. And now we're looking at the opportunity for us within this new program that has been enacted through the bipartisan infrastructure law. As Scott just pointed out, there's $65 billion that's available to these corridors if it doesn't get clawed back somewhere over the next few years. But I think it's looking good. And what the BIL did was it permits states and entities like the Chippewa Commission or states to take a lead in corridor development and to compete for a portion of those grants, about $14 billion, and then to take the lead in the development of these corridors, which are the state-supported corridors. Now, of course, this is all being done through the new FRA Corridor Identification and Development Program, as I said, we call SID. And that program is going to create a pipeline for funded projects. And you can almost, well, there's a lot of difference, of course, you can almost think of it a little bit like the beginning of the interstate highway system in the 1920s. Now, Amtrak has a well-established structure for partnering with the states, and that's going to continue. In the cases where the state or the eligible entity, such as the commission, wants to explore selecting an operator competitively, we're going to need a different structure. And that's what AI Pro is working on right now. And so why are we going to need a new structure? Because we don't have the same authority, nor will we seek it, that Amtrak has for access and so on. So this new structure for picking an operator and getting a corridor underway has got to be commercially based. We're not reinventing the wheel. It's a lot like what has been going on in Connecticut, as well as in the commuter authorities all around the country. What's different about it? Well, we don't have authority, cram down authority of any kind. And so therefore agreements have got to be made with the host railroads for access, for on-time performance. All that's got to be negotiated commercially. We've got to come up with liability for each case, for each project, liability protection. We're going to look at liability protection, generally speaking, across the board, perhaps eventually including Amtrak. We're going to need to identify equipment. Yeah. We're going to need to identify equipment. We're going to need to identify workforce. All of those have got to be worked through. We're going to look at economic development around stations. So our method of getting there on each of these projects, in which we're working with the Chippewa Commission, our method of getting there is to hold a series of what we're calling market soundings, which are a way of exploring each of these issues for each of these projects. We then hope to enter partnerships with the states in the lead, and then submit projects to the pipeline. So in conclusion, our proposals for intercity operations are going to be under the railway labor laws. As I said, we've got labor on our board. In the foreseeable future, of course, with the NEC and the long distance routes and all of the state supported routes, the Amtrak Connexus program is going to have the major part of the responsibility. for sure. But we believe that within the state-supported routes, there are going to be opportunities for competition. We think it's going to be between Amtrak and our carriers. We think that overall, this new competition system, got to be a new system for these corridor operators. It's going to be good for the states. It's going to be good for labor. It's going to make freight railroads a true partner. And ultimately, we think the competitive element injected, even though it may not be very large in the first instance, is going to be good for Amtrak and the national network being created by the FRA. Mason, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, maybe I'll ask a question if I can, Ray and Mason.
Sure.
And so sort of to summarize where we are and why we're talking to you, the Chippewa St. Croix Commission, which I described earlier, has engaged AI Pro and your firm to investigate this and remind us of the deadline that we're looking at, and then what has the progress been in moving forward with the market sounding that we're talking about?
Yeah, the deadline is created by the FRA solicitation. They've solicited for projects. They're due, as you know very well, on the 20th of March. So we've got to get everything shoehorned into a proposal by the 20th of March, which will then go forward.
With the
Mason,
first
do you wanna
round.
give us a summary of where we are in that process and what's going to happen between now and March 20th.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think another important thing to mention with that March 20th deadline is if you're accepted into the sort of pipeline system that's been created for the kind of first of 3 rounds, you do get a no match grant of $500,000 to further develop your corridor. So I think that's important. And then the next 2 are based on matching from, you know, state DOTs or whatever the kind of funding system the local match would be. So kind of where we are so far, we've had very productive conversations with the host railroad. For the most part, the entirety of this service will be on the Union Pacific into St. Paul Union Depot. There's about a 3-mile stretch that's on BNSF. So that's and then there are some infrastructure projects longer term that could mitigate that. We've had preliminary conversations with labor about this project. We've had liability conversations that have been set to talk about the insurance system, because we're working kind of in a new model that could potentially involve pooling. There's a lot of different things because Amtrak kind of has their national coverage system, which they've been working under. And then rolling stock is the last kind of key element of getting this service started, which we're setting those conversations now, most likely sometime in the middle of February.
Right, thanks. And so what we're going to do, I've got a couple more things to mention. I'll have you guys stay on the line, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions before we go to Lisa. So Mark, if you can try to restart the PowerPoint.
Okay.
I have a couple more remarks. And while he's doing that, Ray or Mason, was there anything you wanted to say that I didn't ask you about? I think you covered it pretty well. We'll stay tuned.
I guess the biggest thing is, you know, from everything we've heard within FRA, they're very interested to see how this kind of competitive model will work for the intercity system. Obviously, we know, you know, people within the rail industry are very aware how competitive the commuter industry is. You know, we see promoting a competitive agenda. It brings down infrastructure costs that the states would have to bear for starting a new service. Host railroads, certain ones are ready to test that and you know, work with excess capacity they already have on certain lines. Obviously, they have some lines where, yeah, you're going to need a significant infrastructure investment, but that's not across the board. You know, this is a line where they see we're pretty minimal infrastructure improvements. Yeah, siding here, siding there. You can start this service and it could be pretty effective until, you know, longer term. Yeah, you might need a certain infrastructure projects. The Westminster Trench in Minnesota comes to mind as something that probably longer term would be useful looking into, but isn't necessarily required for the creation of this service.
All right, thanks. And I think what's interesting about this is this may actually, if it goes forward, we hope it does, could be the pilot for this because of the circumstances coming together, the quality of the railroad that's already there, the cooperation Union Pacific, the fact that it's a new corridor gets started, and we have things like St. Paul Union Depot on the other end. So Mark, if you want to hit the,
It was hung up, so.
try this one right there. See the little, not the next one.
Yeah.
Right there. Okay. Click on that. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think our technology is mostly working. So far you've been able to, we talked about this, the corridor identification and development program. I just want to tell you a couple other things. And I don't at all expect you to read this, but I just wanted to indicate that the coalition on January 18th sent Wisconsin DOT Secretary Craig Thompson a letter asking WISDOT to formally submit the Chicago to Twin Cities corridor. Lisa will talk about where they are on this. And then we also asked for WISDOT to work with us on how do we get the Eau Claire to Twin Cities corridor submitted to FRA too, so that both of those corridors could be eligible for that federal funding and move forward. And I'm just going to briefly mention, well, why do we want to do this? You know, I think probably if you're here, you already think maybe passenger train service would be a good idea. But we do know that there are reasons for it. There are economic reasons, as I said before. For instance, Royal Credit Union has been involved in this effort with us for quite a while, and they see it as an important talent attraction opportunity for our area, that if we have passenger rail service, it helps them keep and retain talent. And then there are numbers. No, it won't. I think when you pull that up, I think we lose our PowerPoint. Yeah, I need to have you stop and just restart. Where we
Okay, yeah, this thing is kind of
All right, go ahead
glitchy.
and bring it back up. And then use that one at the bottom, because that, you gotta wait till it's up. Let's see, reshare, share your screen.
Yeah.
Maybe, there we go. There you go. Was it back up? Okay. Right, unshare again. Okay. Don't mind bearing with us. We'll talk about this a little bit. What I wanted to show you is, do passenger trains, they do tend to need some public support. Is that worth it? And all right, go back to mine. There you go. And then restart it, right? That one that's high.
Yep.
That one there. Okay, like that. There we go.
Okay.
All right, so PCMC, that second train we were talking about. Some of the published information about this is that it will cost the states some money. They are estimating each year, but they have analysis that shows if the state puts in around $7 million, they're going to get $25 million back in economic benefits. And one that's even more interesting or more in depth is the state of Missouri supports train service between St. Louis and Kansas City. Their Department of Transportation hired a firm to do a study of what is the economic benefit of this. And what they found is that it costs the state of Missouri about $8 million a year to operate this service, to make sure it is continued through Amtrak. And their analysis shows that it not only brings in $65 million in tax revenue, but a total benefits of, $22 million in tax revenue and total benefits of $208 million in all of the economic activity it creates for the state and the communities in the state. So one other thing I want to tell you about, and if you're interested in this, you can see me during the break or later if you are in a business. I've been working with my colleagues at the Green Bay, Fox Cities, Milwaukee, and Economic Development in Madison, the Chambers and the Economic Development Organizations, to put together a list of businesses in Wisconsin who support passenger rail service and want to see it expanded. And there's a statement here that we're signing on to, and we do have a number of organizations that have said that they'll be part of that. So if you're interested and you're on a business, see me about that. So this is what we often think of if we're going to make a trip, let's say to downtown Minneapolis or downtown St. Paul. You know you're going to face this, and you wonder what time you'll actually get there. Do you leave a little bit early because who knows what the traffic's going to be like? So what if you could be relaxing, watching a movie, getting some work done? What about students? This is actually a historic picture at Menominee of students at Stout, I believe in the 1940s, getting on a train. This is a modern day picture at Champaign, Illinois. There are places already where students use trains very heavily. Trains are great for family trips. They can bring tourists to our area. We have lots of great bike trails. We have music. We have outdoor activities. We could be bringing people to our area by train. And then where the train doesn't go directly, we already talked about throughway connections. When we start the service through here, we envision things like having service, having direct connections from Hudson to River Falls for the university there and others. So there's some information about the Rail Coalition, and I think I've got about 3 minutes for questions if there are any for us. And Mark, you might watch the chat and see if they are, and then you can stop sharing my screen and get Lisa's ready. if I'm asking you to multitask too much there, aren't I? So, does anybody have any questions? Yes, Ann.
Right.
I'll repeat the question if you can check the chat. Yeah.
You had mentioned that typically businesses that are interested in be asking for businesses to sign on to support this, the passenger rail services statewide. You mentioned some of the businesses that have shown interest.
Yeah, we're not getting real public with it yet until we have sort of a critical mass. But some of the ones you probably have heard of would be like the Green Bay Packers, Festival Foods, RA Credit Union, Ayers Associates here, UW Eau Claire, UW Stout, Bellin Health. So some of those organizations, there's some key, Ho Chunk Gaming in Madison. So there's some of those organizations that we're putting together, and we're probably going to release that probably within 2 weeks, is some of the initial names. So right now, and I should reiterate, the main effort right now is to get those applications into FRA so our corridors can be designated and we can move forward in the program. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that. We also have Ray and Mason on, so if anybody has questions for them. Mark, are there any questions in the chat?
Just hang on.
Anybody else here have questions? Yes.
I have a question regarding the market sounding process.
Yeah.
First of all, I understand too, it will help with simplifying the complexity of that project, but when you look at identifying all of these and the methodology that's going to be used, I'm curious about who certainly the stakeholders will be included in this process. I'm wondering how the public and the communities are going to be invited to be part of this process, and I'm also wondering about the method being used to gather the necessary information, because here I think it's a one-time shot to really get some things really done and to get the information that's needed to progress, and I'm just curious where it starts, and it sort of goes into a public arena after that, or a bigger process, and that
I'll tell you what I know, and then maybe Mason or Ray would want to jump in, and then Lisa might even have comments later. So the public is involved in it because it's the Rail Commission that is sponsoring it, and so they represent those entities. And then a second thing about that is once it gets into the court, so these are actually parallel programs. So the market sounding does have some areas that are going to have to be confidential because they involve discussions of contracts and costs and competition and so forth. But once something moves forward, certainly it would become public before any public funds are, and there'd be public opportunity to have input. That's actually parallel but complementary to the FRA process. So Ray or Mason, would you want to answer the question if you heard it? About how's the public involved in the market sounding?
Yeah, I can kind of take that. So obviously public involvement for any rail service in the country is critical. The public's the one who are riding the trains. At the end of the day, their public is the one who is paying for these services once the federal funding kind of starts to wane down after the creation of this service. For the actual market sounding, kind of the ones you've heard me mention so far, meetings with host railroads, labor, rolling stock, stuff like it. Insurance, the public isn't really needed to be involved with those technical conversations. However, probably at the very tail end of February, early March, we're kind of planning a big market sounding event, which we're still getting location finalized. I wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of in the Twin Cities, where that's when we'll bring in all the various stakeholders and the sort of the public side, the various rail groups within the states of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and others to provide their input. What stuff do they want to see? Do they want to see bus connections connecting, University of Wisconsin, River Falls, for example? That's one we've heard about. What are the key aspects of this corridor that the public sees as critical to its long-term success? So we can incorporate that into the FRA application, because we understand that for some services, busing maybe, a bus connection connecting into this regional corridor is going to be really important. So kind of understanding where the public is, what's important to them is going to be pretty critical. So all of these, various public groups will be involved in that.
Okay, I can take one more question. Go ahead, Bill.
Ray, what are our chances of getting passenger service in Eau Claire in this program? Are you optimistic that we're going to succeed?
If that was for us, I think we're very optimistic. The FRA they've been given a lot of money they have to give out. As of right now, there are currently about 90 expressions of interest, and a decent number of those are complementing other corridors. But the FRA is going to be very anxious to get any kind of money out the door for rail projects, at least for the initial kind of funding. So we're pretty confident that we can get this service running within a few years. So that's something that we're kind of been working towards. The main thing we've seen from the FRA is that the support of rail labor is going to be critical, which is an area we're already being pretty proactive about.
Maybe I should ask this question because people keep asking me. So I'm interested in those of you that are involved in working with rail operators. What is the soonest we could see it buy a ticket on a train if the corridor moves forward? It's a hard
Ray,
question.
that'd probably be
It's pretty hard to tell. I think, I'd like to say 2 years, but I don't know. It depends on if the pieces come together, such as the liability, we can get the coverage, we can get the equipment delivered on time, we could get the approval. I think the important part of this is, which I should have stated earlier, is this first step one. It's not a complete application. Nobody expects us to have, or anybody, or I think in any of the corridors out there, except perhaps some of them on the Amtrak, where they've done a lot of analysis so far. These are not going to be complete projects. They're notionally viable projects that the FRA then accepts in step one. When they accept them, then we begin to develop in detail the information that you need in terms of the questions that I was talking about. On-time performance, access fees, and blah, blah, blah.
We're gonna go ahead.
When we get that settled, then we should know, then we should be able to. I don't know if we can, I hope we can make a projection by the time the application goes in, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, given that this line is a very limited infrastructure, upfront infrastructure investments, it does shorten the timeline for creation of service. So that's definitely an advantage. If I had to just ballpark a number, 2 to 4 years, maybe.
I've been saying 5, so but we'll see. I mean, that can be fast. It seems like those of us in Eau Claire that know, we had a chamber event at the Pablo Center last night. We remember that was just a gleam in our eye, and here it is. We've been able to enjoy that, and it seemed like a long time away before it would be built, and we're already enjoying it. So what we don't know is how long will FRA take to make a decision on the applications? How long will the service development plans take? Some of those kinds of things, but I think we're very optimistic. And I think one of the things that there's several people who've been involved in the Rail Coalition here, and we're going to introduce all of them a little bit later on. We've been at this quite a while. And so some people have sort of gotten tired of us talking about it and wonder, is this ever going to happen? And I think this is really good news with the federal funding becoming available and all the other pieces happening. So it's kind of a perfect storm in a positive way. A little bit about our schedule then. We're going to hear from Lisa in just a minute. She's going to speak for somewhere up to a half an hour. We'll take a 15-minute break after her presentation. We'll have Arun Rao from Amtrak after that. We'll have Rick Harnish after Arun. We hope to wrap all of that up by a little after 11, and then we're going to have a 10-minute business meeting for the Rail Coalition, where we'll elect our open board of directors seats. So you're welcome to stay for that if you're a member, or we'll be finished then. So we're going to continue to move on. Mark, if you want to bring up the PowerPoint, and we won't start it until just before she's ready to go so that it works, we hope.